said, look, I just got control of the Cleveland Public Schools. I want you guys to find me my new CEO for the Cleveland schools, our new superintendent. And I said, Mike, we're not a search firm. And he goes, I know. And I said, Mike, we're not a search firm. He says, you're not listening to me. And if you knew anything about Mike White, he never listened to you, and you did what he said. We were the people who went out and found Barbara Bird Bennett. All right, and then we staffed Barbara Bird Bennett for the first year or so until she brought more of her staff in and whatnot. We weren't a search firm. We weren't a staffing firm. We were a public relations firm. Like I said, but we were so anxious for business. Whatever came in the door, we took. Well, when 9/11 happened, September 11th, 1989, and I'm certainly not going to compare what we went through to what the poor people who perished in the World Trade Centers went through. But I lost my business that day. Our phones did not ring on 9/11 at all. We didn't get a single phone call about business. On the 11th, on the 12th, the 13th, we didn't have a single billable hour for 3 months. It was, I don't know what you were all doing on 9/11. We sat there and watched television all day long, and for the next couple of weeks going, oh my God, what's going on here? Has the world changed? The world's crashing down on us. We were not essential to any of our clients. We didn't have any retainer clients. It was all project work, and they didn't need us. I think a lot of people just stopped doing business on 9/11. And by the time business came back, it never came back to what it was before. It kind of dribbled back in 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, and like any other marriage, if you will, when you have a business partner, when money gets tight and you're spending more than you bring in, things get angry and things get tough, and we decided to split up the business. Not that there was anything to split up, a couple pieces of furniture and a couple of computers. So I ended up going back home, leaving my office, going back home, saying, oh my God, what do I do with my life? And it was Bob Smith, who used to be president of the Greater Cleveland Partnership and who runs Spiro Smith Agency, investment firms, and is now, I don't know, he's on the port board, among other things, in Cleveland. He took me aside. He said, quit trying to be all things to all people. He said, that's your failure. You're trying to do everything, and that's not the way to do it. He said, pick one thing and get really good at it. Now, people have been telling me that for years and years, and I never listened to them. Because if a restaurant comes in the door and they have money, I want to take that money. But I really thought about it because I didn't have a business. And I said, what do I like best? Of all the things I've ever done in my life, what do I like the best? And it was the crisis communications. It was the media training. It was the bell rings and the Dalmatians are out the door. I love that stuff. And I decided right then and there I was going to build my business around one thing, and it was crisis communications. I got to tell you, the day I made that decision, about a week later, the phone started to ring. We started to put out our newsletter. We sent out an electronic newsletter 2 times a month, twice a month. It now goes out to over 5,000 people. I started doing more speaking on it. And when the day came, about 6 months later, that Joe Roman from the Greater Cleveland Partnership, who had never given me the time of day, because I wasn't a CEO and I wasn't important in his life, when he was giving some kind of speech, I can't remember what it was, and he said, Hennis, that crisis communication guy will tell you. And I heard my words coming out of his mouth. I thought, this works. This works. And all I can tell you now is, in the years since I opened this business, Hennis Painter Communications, in 2002, our sales have gone through the roof. I've 4 times as many employees and associates that I had in the past. I actually give business to my former competitors, who are all on my mailing list. They know exactly what we're doing. Instead of competing with them, we collaborate with them. And in 2 months, we'll be moving to 32nd floor of Terminal Tower. We're taking over half of the 32nd floor because our business has gotten so large. So the best piece of advice I ever got and took was, don't try to be all things to all people. Do one thing and do it really, really good. And if I'm living proof, it works.
And Bruce, when's the big office reception there? We'd all like to come.
I'll let you know. I signed the lease yesterday.
Oh, good. So when we're getting advice and dispensing advice, what do you think are the keys to, in your experience, to dispense advice and make it in a way that people are going to accept, or at least listen to? Tom, I wish there.
Yeah, well, this gives me a chance to tell a David Stashower story. We worked for somebody like that for 22 years, as articulate as he was. Yeah, tell at least one story. He sent me down at one point and said, okay, and I'm going to put you on this new account, and I need to tell you something about this guy that you're going to be dealing with. And the moral here is tell it in an interesting way so it gets your attention. And I remember this 30 years later. He said, okay, now this guy, he says, you need to understand that if he's not speaking, he's not happy. And I thought, I said, well, okay, but I assume that, you know, he enjoys a response so that, you know that he knows I'm listening. He said, Tom, when the man isn't speaking, he's not happy. Make him happy. And that was true. I won't say who this was, but Dick knows. I learned to keep my mouth shut and everything was fine. But say it in an interesting way, and maybe say it twice if you're sure you've got the right advice.
Great. Sue?
Well, really along, I guess, the same lines as I was thinking, you know, really it's all about being a good listener. Whether it's, you know, dispensing advice or sales or soliciting donations for a charity, you really need to do more listening than talking in order to really be able to figure out what's going to resonate with that person that you are communicating with. So a lot of times people have a tendency, and nerves play into it, to start to kind of run off at the mouth and just data dump everything that they want to share with somebody about whatever their product, their service is, and they don't sit back and just ask a question and then listen. So that's something that I've tried to communicate with and share with my staff, and then try to put in practice myself when I'm interacting with anyone, whether it is a prospect or a vendor or even my children who are teenagers. So it's important to listen to them too.
Thank you.
My clients take my advice. I mean, usually when they call, they're so desperate for any kind of lifeline that you know, they'll do almost anything that you tell them. But I find that my business acquaintances and the people who come to me to say, Bruce, and this is probably the single most often question that I get asked is, Bruce, I want to do what you do. Tell me how to do that. I want to be a consultant. I want to open a firm. I'm more than happy to sit down with anybody, and I will do a data dump. I'll tell them how to manage their finances. I'll tell them how to save for for retirement and how to do billing and whatever they want to know. I'm happy to share. And I find that over the years, only one person has ever actually taken my advice. So I don't know how to give advice, I guess not very well, because most people don't take it. Janice Small, for those of you who know, Janice came to me when she opened up her consulting firm, I think 8 or 9 years ago. And I said, here's how to do it. She's the only one who ever did what I told her to do. The rest, don't take my advice.
Well, I hope they're at least paying your bills.
Nah,
Not
not those, no. The clients do, not the
clients.
The clients do.
So, Dick, we got a question? Jimmy?
I have a question. You know, some of you said that, Bruce said, you know, best advice I ever took. Now you're saying that you give advice to people that don't take it. Why do you think that is? Why don't people take advice? You're giving advice. I mean, how many people in this room are going to take it?
That's a great question.
I have a quick story about that. It involves Bill Brokaw and I. And Bill, of course, is a very, very successful creative person in town. You know, maybe even the most successful in the last 30 years. And I was sitting with him and I said, gee, you know, Bill, I almost tried to become a creative person, but years ago I went to see Terry Byer, who was the then executive director at the Ad Club, and I showed him my little portfolio that I'd whipped up in college, and he took a fast look at it and he said, young man, have you ever considered account management? And you know, I was decimated, but on the other hand, I just wanted to get into the business, and account management sounded good too, so I did that. And I tell Bill that story, and he says, Tom, I had exactly the same experience. Almost the same exact year you did. I went to see Terry Byer, I showed him my portfolio, and he said, young man, can you ever consider account management? And it threw me when he said that. You know, I mean, I've been successful and everything. I'm happy to be in account management, but it kind of blew my mind. And I decided that you can draw different morals, but the moral I took was that Bill Brokaw knew that he was a great creative guy, and nobody was going to tell him different. And so he didn't even need to ask Byer that question. I wasn't so sure, and I probably wasn't all that good. So for me to just accept that advice was also correct. So I think, my take is that we were both right. But sometimes you got to know, listen to yourself.
I think people don't take advice because I think human nature is we all are very self-centered and ego-driven and about ourselves, and we put more stock into our opinions and what we've already thought through and the conclusion we've come to. And so I think the tendency is to go out and seek advice that confirms your belief, what conclusion you've already come to, rather than truly being open to listening to somebody else's point of view.
Jim, that's a terrific question, and I think the best way for me to answer is to share with you a story Lori Mitchell told me. Most of you in the room know who Lori Mitchell is, the headhunter. Lori tells me that probably the single most frustrating experience she has with candidates is when she wants to help them write their resume or polish their resume, and she'll spend a lot of time on that, work with them. She says a great number of candidates get actually angry in a very juvenile and very ineffective way when she says this is what you need to have in your resume. Now think about this. Who knows more about what employers want than Lori Mitchell? Now, she may not always have the right answer, but let's just start with the fact that she knows what employers want. And the person who's looking for a job is looking for a job. I mean, especially if they're unemployed right this second. So whose advice, would I take? Am I going to take the unemployed person's advice, or am I going to take Lori's advice? I think I would break down and maybe have two resumes. One I like and one I'm going to use to make Lori happy. I don't know why people reject good advice. All right, I think you need can we add a psychologist to the panel here?
Absolutely. Barry, could you sit up here? Oh, you're there. That's interesting. I'm going to ask Jeff to fly over here. Jeff, you work with students all the time. In relation to this comment about taking advice and resume, what's your experience at Virginia Martin?
Sure. Thanks for asking. I think with young people, they do come into a situation with their preset expectations of what things are. So it does take a while for them to learn. I think it's when they get the experience, then they realize, wow, he was right or someone was right. So it takes a while to come out of that and be receptive to advice. You just got to get that experience first. So I think people are more open to advice when they have context to compare with.
And I want to relate a story, get back to something Tom said. I was in business in my early 20s. I really needed the money. Had a client that owed me about $5 grand. He knew that I needed the $5 grand, and I went in to pick up a check, and he handed me $2 grand. And I really needed that money, and I really wanted to take it. But I followed a piece of advice that was given to me by an old sage who said, if you've done the work, you get paid for the work. The best thing I ever did in my life, took a lot of guts. I ripped up the check in front of him and said, you owe me $5 grand, and you promised to pay. And I walked out of his office. I had a cashier's check for $5 grand, the following afternoon. People will test you all the time. They will test you. And if you're in business, whether you're in a sales position or you're in a counseling business, whatever it is, they're going to test you. And I think you have to hold your ground. And that was a real important lesson for me. These days, during the recession, 9/11, I would have taken the $2 grand, though, I think, just to have the cash flow.